In the 1700s, Britain was becoming one of the most powerful nations on earth. Its ships crossed the oceans, its merchants traded across continents, and on the eastern coast of North America, 13 British colonies were growing rapidly. Together, these colonies were home to millions of people. They provided trade, resources and wealth to the British Empire. Few could imagine that Britain would ever lose them, but a storm was already beginning to form, one that would eventually create a new nation called the United States of America. After fighting an expensive war against France, Britain found itself deep in debt. The government needed money, and many leaders believed the American colonies should help pay the cost. New taxes were introduced. Among them was the famous Stamp Act. Many colonists were furious. They argued that they were being taxed without representation in Parliament. Soon, protests spread through the colonies. Crowds gathered in the streets. Merchants organized boycotts, and anger toward Britain continued to grow. What began as a disagreement over taxes was becoming something much bigger. Then came one of the most famous protests in American history, the Boston Tea Party. On a cold night in December 1773, a group of colonists boarded British ships in Boston Harbor. Disguised as Native Americans, they dumped hundreds of chests of tea into the water. The message was clear. The colonies would no longer quietly accept British control. News of the protests spread across the Atlantic. In London, many officials were outraged. Instead of calming the situation, Britain responded with even harsher measures, and the road toward revolution became shorter than ever before. The British government was furious. To punish Massachusetts, Parliament introduced a series of harsh laws known as the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was closed. Trade was restricted. British control over the colonies became even stronger. But instead of forcing the colonists into submission, the new laws united them. For the first time, many colonies began working together. The conflict was no longer about tea, it was becoming a struggle over freedom and self-government. On April 19th, 1775, everything changed. British soldiers marched toward Lexington and Concord. Their mission was simple: seize colonial weapons and stop the growing rebellion. But the colonists were ready. As the two sides faced each other, a single gunshot rang out. No one knows who fired it. Yet that shot would become known as the shot heard around the world. The American Revolutionary War had begun, and there was no turning back. As the war expanded, the colonies needed a leader. They chose George Washington, a former military officer with experience on the frontier. Washington faced enormous challenges. His army was smaller, poorly equipped, and often short of food and supplies. Many believed the rebellion would fail. After all, Britain possessed one of the most powerful armies in the world. But Washington refused to give up. His determination would keep the revolution alive through its darkest moments. For several years, the war dragged on. Britain won battles. The Americans won battles. Neither side could secure a final victory. Then, in 1777, everything changed. At Saratoga, American forces achieved a major victory against the British Army. The battle shocked Europe. For the first time, foreign powers began to believe that the colonies might actually win. One nation paid especially close attention: France. And soon, Britain would face a much larger problem than the American rebels alone. In 1778, France officially entered the war on the American side. For Britain, this was a disaster. The conflict was no longer a colonial rebellion. It had become a global war. French ships challenged British naval power. French money and supplies helped the American cause. Soon, Spain and other nations would also become involved. Britain now had enemies across the world. The empire was being stretched to its limits, and King George III was running out of options. The decisive moment came in 1781. At Yorktown, Virginia, British General Charles Cornwallis found himself trapped. American forces surrounded his army on land. French warships blocked escape by sea. The British position became hopeless. After weeks of siege, Cornwallis surrendered. The defeat shocked Britain. Although fighting would continue for a short time, everyone understood what had happened. The war was effectively over, The dream of keeping the American colonies under British rule had collapsed. After the disaster at Yorktown, the British government understood that the war could not be won. Public support for the conflict was collapsing. The cost of the war continued to rise, and Parliament faced growing pressure to end the fighting. In 1783, representatives of Britain and the United States signed the Treaty of Paris. For the first time, Britain officially recognized American independence. The 13 colonies were no longer British colonies. A new nation had been born. King George III had not personally commanded armies. He had not fought on the battlefield, yet many people blamed him for the loss of America. To his critics, he became the symbol of British mistakes, the king who failed to understand the colonies, the king who underestimated the desire for self-government, and the king who watched as a large part of the British Empire slipped away. His reign would continue for many years, but history would always remember one fact. He was the king who lost America. The American Revolution changed the world. What began as a dispute over taxes became the creation of a new nation. The United States of America would grow into one of the most powerful countries in history, and the ideas born during the Revolution would inspire movements across the globe. For Britain, it was a painful defeat. For America, it was a beginning. And it all started with a conflict that neither side expected to become a revolution. History often turns on decisions that seem small at first, and few decisions changed the world more than those that led Britain to lose America.